This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1152, Comic Talk Solo.
Ain't no stopping them shenanigans. Love getting into shenanigans. All up in them shenanigans. 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 Shenanigans.
Welcome to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. This is episode 1152. I'm your host, Adam Chapman. This is a Comic Talk solo episode where I'm just going to kind of chat about some random topics. We have, unfortunately, my usual co-host for, I guess, the second episode of the month is usually like a creator spotlight or something like that. Nathan Struck usually joins me. He was unable to due to other commitments at this time. And then my son was actually going to do an episode, Another Marvelous First. That just didn't end up panning out, although we do have issues locked in and read. So hopefully that'll be coming out in the next month or so, including the first appearances of Cloak and Dagger. So this falls to me to try and get an episode out before this Saturday is over. This Saturday, I guess with July 11th. It's funny, I always remember AJ Reese, longtime fan of the show. Haven't talked to him in a bit, but hopefully he's still listening. Maybe he is. But I remember way back when I would always be worried about my schedule, and he'd be like, no one cares. And so I always remember that. I often bring it up. At the end of the day, no one actually cares. But I do know, as someone who listens to lots of podcasts, you do get used to a certain cadence and knowing that a certain, show is going to have an episode at a certain time. And usually my show goes up 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, July 11th. Sorry, Saturdays, in this case, July 11th. So it always matters to me, but I know that it probably doesn't matter to a lot of people. But, as a listener of content, it definitely is something that has mattered to me. I just wanted to talk about some random stuff. I guess the big one is that I've talked about this. I don't know if I've talked about this a lot in my show. Maybe I have. I think it was in the middle of January, maybe late January. I really made a concerted effort. I was so behind in my reading at the time, and I really wanted to get caught up. So I was like, okay, I'm going to make a goal that every day I'm going to read 10 comics. And the idea was I would go through this backlog of all the new comics that had come out so that I would be completely caught up, which I'm now caught up. I've been caught up for a while. The problem problem is a weird term in this case, but I still want to read 10 comics a day, but I don't have new comics. So now what do I start reading? So recently, when I was away on vacation a few months ago, I was reading Cable. And I was like, well, I'll read some Cable. And it became, I'm going to read some X-Men. I'm going to read some, X-Force. And then I kind of took a hiatus from that for a bit. And then recently I got the newest Iron Man Epic collection. I believe it's called Crash and Burn. And it covers, around issue 300 or so with the Iron Legion and other adventures there. And so I read that and really kind of ripped through it and really enjoyed it. And I think I read a lot of those books at some point in the past. And I was like, well, I got to keep going. So I did keep going. So I read through The Crossing, read through Teen Tony, and then I was kind of like, well, maybe I'm done with Iron Man for now. So I'm just kind of looking around trying to decide what else. And then I actually I went back to, I think it's The Enemy Within Epic Collection, which is, I believe, the earliest one that I have for Iron Man. I decided I didn't want to go silver or kind of early bronze with Iron Man. I kind of want to start around issue 115 when Michelini does, which I believe the upcoming volume that's coming out, really soon, starts with that era. So I went back to Enemy Within, and I'm enjoying it because I don't remember all the pieces and how they all kind of fit together, because it has been a while since I reread, so that's been a lot of fun. I did decide to take the plunge and buy the X-Men Elsewhen by John Byrne, volume 1 of a 3-volume set that we're eventually going to get. It's done by, not by Marvel directly. It's through Marvel Arts imprint with Abrams. And gotta say, really enjoyed it so far. I'm only one issue in, but the artwork is really solid. It feels like, he had the time to do a really good job, and it didn't feel rushed, and it was his own kind of timeline. It's kind of like, what maybe he wanted Hidden Years to be. Like, Hidden Years had moments of being fun, but it was also a monthly comic. So I can only imagine, the stress that book and the changes that book probably went through as a result. But seeing a creator just kind of have time to themselves to work on something and do something that they're really proud of and like, but aren't trying to meet deadlines, you can tell. Like, there's a marked difference here. And, like, I don't remember the last time that I saw John Byrne's artwork looking this solid. No, I mean, I hadn't enjoyed it as much recently from his most recent stuff. And now, when I say most recent stuff, I'm probably thinking the kind of the late 90s stuff. But this shows the man still got it. You know, he can still put together a snazzy story. It really has an old school sensibility to it, which I'm sure for the target audience is probably perfect. So yeah, this has been a real pleasure to read so far. Again, as I said, I think I'm in maybe the first or second issues so far. They're not necessarily clearly delineated. They're fairly clearly delineated, but they don't have covers or anything like that. But yeah, this has been really enjoyable, and I think people should pick it up. I mean, I'm definitely not the biggest John Byrne fan in the world, but I definitely can appreciate a lot of his work, and this is a lot of fun to read. You can tell this is love. This is his love letter to an era of the X-Men that he was that this many years later he's still well remembered for, and people look back on it and think like, man, that the alchemy of John Byrne and Chris Claremont was really special. So it's interesting to kind of go back and read something like X-Men Elsewhere, which again I highly recommend because it's so much fun. So I've been looking at like what do I read next? What's the next kind of project? Part of me thought I should go back and read Fables, because I remember tearing through Fables when I first, I wouldn't say discovered it, because it makes it sound like I'm somehow fancy, even though it's been going on for years. But when I finally got around to reading this book that was so critically acclaimed, I think it was near issue 100 or so. And obviously it went up to issue 150, and I don't remember all of it. And I feel like I read it all, but I'm not even sure anymore. Definitely read most of the 12 issues that kind of came after, which will never be in the compendiums, which makes me a little sad. But I do have the compendium volumes from DC, so I do have it kind of an easy, well, relatively, I mean, they're big, but a relatively easy way to reread it. It's funny, when I look at it, I wish it wasn't, it has some kind of adult stuff in terms of some of the content and sexuality, but for the most part, it's not always mature readers. But I wish it didn't have those mature reader content issues, because I actually would love to have my son read it, because it's all these recognizable, fairy tale characters, but, kind of reimagined and redone in different ways. And that's really cool, and there's something really exciting reading Fables, especially, after it's been a little while, and going back to a book like that, which has so much mythology, which is interesting too, because when you read it, you're like, oh, they haven't established this yet, or they haven't built it they haven't brought it into canon so that you as a reader know it. But if you've already read forward in the past, everything. So it's almost like a series like Lost, which is so much built on top of other things. So when you go back to the beginning, you're like, oh yeah, no one knows anything yet, and you're just kind of starting from zero, but it is kind of cool at the same time. So that would definitely be a big project. So I'm trying to think what I kind of have on my read pile that I'm trying to get through in terms of physical media. And that's a big thing too. Like I read a lot digitally these days, but it is a whole other animal to go back to physical. It's really fun. And, I kind of try to balance it. Obviously reading X-Men Elsewhere, that's a physical release. That's a lot of fun to be able to read it. Obviously, I should say with X-Men Elsewhere, it's not like people haven't kind of read it before, because a lot of it was, online before, but in this nice hardcover format is really a special way to experience it. And I do highly recommend people pick it up, even though, again, I have not done with it. I did want to mention, in terms of more modern comics, 2 issues I really enjoyed, and I'm excited to read the last part of the storyline because it hasn't happened yet, is the most recent arc in Black Cat. Black Cat 11 and 12, and I guess 13 as well, which is not out yet, has a really interesting combination of Black Cat and the Punisher by G. Willow Wilson and Andres Genolet, I don't know how you pronounce that, with color art by Brian Reber, letters by Virtual Calligraphy's Joe Caramagna. Adam Hughes, the cover artist. Really dig the way in which Black Cat and Punisher, meet each other. It was interesting reading it, and it involved, a dog gets hit by a car is the short answer of what happens here. And it was really fascinating and sad, but it shows Frank Castle in a different light, which we're not used to seeing. and then seeing him interact with Black Cat was really interesting. And then so the first issue really had a lot of that, and the second issue was a lot of Black Cat just not understanding how her bad luck doesn't seem to work on Punisher, and not understanding that. And then it leads into like a team up, I guess, that we're going to see in the final chapter in Black Cat 13. But so far, the only 2 chapters of the storyline have come out. They've been tremendously enjoyable, so much fun. Silly and zany, but just a fantastic read. So I highly recommend that people give that a shot as well if they're not already, reading a Black Cat book. Which, it's interesting, Black Cat books are not necessarily home runs. They're not always there. They have been of varying quality. However, Jed McKay did an amazing job on Black Cat. You have G. Willow Wilson doing a great job in Black Cat right now. Like, Black Cat is a book I think that often gets slept on, but it really shouldn't. Really, high quality stuff. Another thing that's on my list, and something I bought, I want to say like a year or 2 ago, and I started reading it, didn't finish it, but it was me finally trying to read some Usagi Yojimbo, because I'd heard so many things over the years, obviously, and I remember having the toy, because it was the Ninja Turtles, when I was a kid. I broke those ears off. Oh, I'm so sad. But he still looked cool. Still looks so awesome. So I had picked up the Usagi Yojimbo Saga Book 1 many years ago. Well, maybe not many years ago. 2 years ago? Maybe 3. And really dug it. From what I read. I didn't read all of it, but I had read a number of the first few stories. I loved the black and white. Love how it really let you focus on certain elements of the art when you didn't kind of have the colors in the way. I was reading, part of the story involved the Ninja Turtles being transported. I thought that was really cool and interesting to see them. So I maybe should go back and, finally finish off this Usagi Yojimbo Saga book that I have, and then maybe make that decision about what to do next, whether or not I want to pick up another volume. And I'm definitely at a break-even point, and I know people who are collectors, not even collectors, but people who, like creating and cultivating and curating these collected edition libraries. You end up in a spot where you're just running out of room. Like I some of it's like I'm duplicating stuff, or I'm buying like modern epics of Amazing Spider-Man so I can get rid of collections that they're replacing. I just don't have a spot for that yet, but I'll try and sell it or have it go somewhere. But in general, like, the library just gets bigger, and at some point you're like, well, do I need to keep all this? And it's hard. And I think, especially when it's more legacy material being reprinted, that stuff I'm more likely to hold on to and keep. Although sometimes you buy older material and you're like, I don't know if this is for me after all. Like I bought the J.M. DeMatteis Dr. Fate. Really excited about it. I'm a big fan of JMD, but I never really read his Dr. Fate before, and I don't know if that book's for me. Maybe that's actually one I should pick out and just try to marshal through with my 10 issues a day, because it'd be interesting just kind of see where that book goes. But my cursory glances at it have definitely made me go, well, maybe this was a mistaken pickup. And I'm curious, like, for those listening, if you want to send me an email, read it on the show, but just about, is there a collection or a trade paperback, hardcover, whatever it might be that you bought, and because you're like, the creative team is Dynamo, this has got to be great, or I really like this author, or whatever the case is, and you were just like, no, not for me, now what do I do? Well, I just have this collection. It's funny, like, growing up, I was such a kid of the library. I loved going to libraries. I didn't really have many books. Well, I guess I had R.L. Stine books, because everyone had Goosebumps back in the day, and they were relatively cheap. But I would go to libraries all the time and get all sorts of books. I've got all the Star Wars books. This is like early 90s. I remember reading a lot of, I can't even remember his name. Dave Duncan was a fantasy writer. I read his stuff. Whoever wrote The Death and Life of Bobby Zed, Don Winslow, I believe. I read a lot of his stuff, crime stuff. So I used to read all the time. And at some point when I got like a job and I was, in university, then I started like buying stuff. And I guess originally with comic book stuff, you couldn't pick it up at a library. Like, this stuff wasn't going to the libraries. You had to pick it up and put it on your shelf. That's just the way it was. And then it became, when books about comics would come out, I wouldn't be trying to track them down in a library. I would just be buying the book. And so I at some point, I just kind of shifted into this culture. And I noticed it more with my son because, he wants the Percy Jackson books, for example. I'm buying him books. I'm not bringing them to the library and getting all the Percy Jackson books out, which absolutely I should have done. But, I'm cultivating someone who is, creating their own library and, is a collector in that way. Not in a collecting for value, but more collecting so that you have this expansive library and you can always kind of go back to these amazing things that you love and enjoy. But it is definitely a slippery slope on kind of where you manage that. But so I'm always dealing with, what else is on the shelf. I recently bought the Green Lantern Sinister Corps Compendium. I should have bought the Rebirth Compendium. I didn't. I'm waiting for it to go on sale, waiting for a good price on it, but mainly to kind of just replace the stuff that I had bought previously in single trades, skinny trades before I had shifted into buying Green Lantern monthly. And so if they continue the compendiums, I would just keep going on those. But again, space is always the problem. And so we have a lot of things going on in our basement right now. In theory, I have a massive unit in our basement that originally I had a TV in it, and I had all sorts of movies and TV shows and DVD. And to be honest, like a lot of that stuff probably doesn't need to be there anymore. I could probably condense into something. I could do something with it. So I have to kind of figure some of that stuff out. And then maybe someday I'll be able to convert some of those shelves to comic book shelves. And then it won't solve the problem. This is the problem of any collector. It'll just postpone the problem, which is, I guess the best you could do. Another book I recently started reading, I'd have to get back into it, so I'd have to start over from the beginning instead of kind of jumping in midway, would be Brooklyn Dreams, also by J.M. Mateus, which I had never read. I'd always heard such wonderful things about, but I just never had a chance to really partake in it before. So it's one of those things where it's like, well, it's kind of sitting there. I should get around to it. Kind of like Moonshadow. I think I finished Moonshadow, but I think I was really close to the end, and then I had an interview with JMD, and then I kind of meant to finish it up, and maybe I didn't do that. So I'm also curious to hear from listeners as well. Like, how many projects like that do you have where you do a massive reread or you're rereading a project and you get near the end and then other things just kind of come up or whatever the case might be, and then you just kind of leave it unread? And you don't mean to, and you mean to go back to it. And then if you ever go back to it, you got to go back to the beginning now because you don't remember anything that you just reread. It's, a horrible thing to do to yourselves, but as, busy reading people, obviously it ends up happening. I think in recent episodes where I've done kind of a solo discussion, I have done a little bit of talking about finest collections, epic collections, etc. And I'm trying to remember, I must have talked about the compacts. I love the idea of the compacts. I wish they weren't, I wish I could have more of them, but I'm also sometimes curious about the ones that I end up buying. Like, should I have even the ones I have? Am I going to read them as much? I guess I did do a whole episode on the compacts. You can check that out in episode 1142 back from May 2nd. So I did chat about that previously. When I look at kind of my shopping list these days, I feel like it is less. I'm buying less. Which makes sense because I think from ongoing books from a trade paperback perspective, typically just buying Daredevil and Spider-Man and Conan and Transformers. I think that's about it. I think those are kind of the main lines that I cover these days, which is more manageable. It's not difficult. It's easier to just kind of manage less. But then from the legacy perspective, that's where I get myself always into trouble. Actually, I realized the other day I had 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, I had put aside all these books that I was going to sell. And spoiler alert, haven't gotten around to it. I've been really putting it aside. Partly my basement got taken over by other things, so I can't really get to my sell pile as much. So I was reading Avengers The Crossing, and I was going to talk with Terry Cavanaugh about Avengers The Crossing, which I have now done, but the episode is not aired yet and won't come out for a few more weeks. So I was like, well, I read The Crossing that was reprinted in the Iron Man epics and throughout 2 different volumes. maybe I should just pick out the omnibus and just figure out what else I should talk about. And I realized it was missing, but it wasn't actually missing. I think it's just in my cell pile I just can't get to. So this omnibus, which was one of the earlier omnibuses I had with The Crossing, which I remember when it was being announced, I was so excited to be able to have that whole storyline in one place. And for the most part, I have it in one place with the Thor epics, the Iron Man epics, which is why I kind of thought that maybe I could just kind of condense. But that's another one where I'm like, I didn't even realize that I didn't have it on my main shelf anymore. When I look at books that are coming out in the next few months, I'm really excited about DC Finest. I've talked before about how DC Finest Events Crisis in Infinite Earths, which is quite a title. They're breaking it up into, I think it's going to end up being 4 volumes, which is cool in some ways. But also, it takes you forever if you're just trying to read Crisis. So I have a Crisis trade paperback. It's pretty old. It's probably 20 years old at this point. It's not the best reproduction, but it'll get you where you're going. I definitely want to get the Absolute Crisis in Infinite Earths, which recently came out, but it's just a little bit more expensive than I really want to shell out for. So I have that I would like at some point. And then I have these DC Finest, and then I'm also getting the compact edition of Crisis. Now, I'm not a Crisis kid. I was, born in 83, so I wasn't reading Crisis when it happened. Everything I knew about Crisis was definitely reading it after the fact and kind of looking backwards. But there's just, there's something to Crisis. There's something to the pedigree and the importance that it has in the DC universe and in publishing. And so I'm excited to, own it in multiple formats so that I can kind of give it out. I recently picked up, and I had mentioned that I probably would do this. I picked up DC's compact edition of Batman Under the Red Hood, or it should be called Under the Hood, but these days it's just called Under the Red Hood. And I actually did an episode a few back with Jed Winnick, where we talked all about working on that book. And so my son just read it, and I was like, oh, I didn't even realize you were picking this up. And he seemed to really like it, and kind of really. I was like, do you want to watch the movie? And he's like, yeah. Because as I've said in the past, and which Judd has himself said on the show, the movie is kind of a clear distillation of what the story idea was without having to take place within a broader DC universe context. It was able to just kind of tell the main story. So in some ways it does succeed in areas where the other one, not that it didn't succeed per se, but it was bogged down by other things. So I would love to be able to watch that with my son. It's interesting, this year is a big one because this will be the first time that I take my son to opening day of a Spider-Man movie. Spider-Man was huge for me when I was younger. I've talked about this on the show before, but in 2002, I was in grade 13, or what we used to call OEC here in Ontario, in Canada. And so I was, my last year of high school. And in creative writing class, I used to write a journal. We had to write a journal. And every day there'd be some sort of thing about Spider-Man was coming. Spider-Man was coming. I was counting down to the release day in May of that year. Could not wait. And I remember going to my teacher and being like, hey, and this is back when, some movies would have midnight releases, but typically they were few and far between. They didn't do it that often, at least not in my area, in Toronto. So I really wanted to go to the first show. And the first show was going to be, I think it was at 12 o'clock or something like that. It was going to be a 12 o'clock show, and I could not wait. So I remember going to my teacher and being like, hey, on this day in May, the first Friday in May, I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave early. I'm going to cut, or, I won't be here at all. But I got to go. And she's like, well, what movie? And I'm like, I got to see Spider-Man. She's like, oh, you have to. Because she'd been reading my journals about it. So she knew. So I remember that morning, me and this other guy, a friend of mine, we decided we were going to go. So we get up and we bail. We get out of there and we're like, hey. And everyone's like, where are they going? And they're like, Spider-Man. It's like, that was an option? Everyone could just ditch. But I just got to kind of go out and, head on over to the theater and go see it. And I had another teacher who was the same idea. I was like, I'm not going to be here. I'm cutting that day and going to see Spider-Man. He's like, oh, yeah, of course. People really did not care that I was going to see this movie. But it's funny because, I guess I was kind of an uptight kid, and I was very worried that they'd be mad at me or I get in trouble, and really no one cared. And pretty sure my parents must have known. I'm pretty sure not only did they know, I think maybe that's why I told them. That's probably what it was. I probably said to my parents, I'm not going to go to school. I'm going to go to school. I'm going to cut school, and I'm going to go to this movie. And they probably were like, well, you at least have to get permission from your teachers, because that's 100% the type of parents I have. So that's probably what happened. And I remember seeing it twice on opening day, because pretty sure I saw it with my mom and my sister after I'd already seen it, because this was huge. This was my movie. Like, I had seen X-Men in 2000, but this was the big one for me. I was a huge Spider-Man fan, could not wait to see it in theaters. And I remember seeing all of them in theaters. I remember trying to get a watch party together to see Spider-Man 3, which is a movie that does not necessarily deserve it. I remember going to see Amazing Spider-Man and being so pumped for that movie. I still like it, I think, more than most people. Kind of think in general, I just always really liked Andrew Garfield in general as Spider-Man. I thought he really brought something to it. And then obviously we have the Tom Holland movies, but I've watched them all with my son. And I brought him to like Across the Spider-Verse in theaters, but seeing a live action Spider-Man movie, 24 years after that first Tobey Maguire movie, and being able to see it with my son on opening day is very exciting. It's interesting. Again, I mentioned this briefly, but these days when a movie comes out on Friday, you can really just see it Thursday, like late afternoon or night. Like, they keep moving that line earlier and earlier, so that the idea of having like a movie really coming out on like a Friday really feels not that true anymore, because they just kind of release the movie whenever they feel like it, and they can call whatever they want. But it's not like you're having just late night screenings on Thursdays anymore. You're basically having most of your screenings are happening. Anyways, we have purchased our tickets. We are, ironically, given my whole spiel right there, we are seeing it on the Thursday night, because my wife has baseball tickets on the Friday night, so we got to make sure we see it, because I'm a slave to opening day. And I think other comic book fans get this, that generally speaking, you got to see it opening day. Now, I think something like Spider-Man, where, you don't want to be spoiled on anything. You want to be able to make sure that, you get there before the internet completely ruins it for you. There is something to that about trying to get to the theater as soon as you can, so you're not spoiled. Like Avengers Doomsday, like I got to see that the first chance I get, because that's going to be spoiled everywhere. There's just no way. You almost have to walk around with giant goggles on and earmuffs and everything, so you don't get ruined in this day and age. But my wife always makes fun. She's like, oh yeah, you got to see everything opening day. I'm like, the types of movies I see are usually, big tentpole blockbusters, comic book movies, and there's an element of like spoiling those things. Whereas if I was going to see, like, a movie I do want to see is The Invite, the new Olivia Wilde movie with Seth Rogen, Ed Norton, and Penelope Cruz, that I do want to see. I don't think it's going to necessarily be spoiled on the internet. It just came out in the same way. So I feel like that one in theory, I could take my time to see. In practice, because it's a smaller movie, it's probably out like next week. Like, it's probably gone. The idea of just kind of having a movie just be in theaters for a little bit and kind of picking it up when it's time is not really a thing either. They're always jockeying for screen space, that you really can't do that anymore. If you really want to see it, you almost are forced to go see it opening weekend, because it might be the only weekend, depending on how well that movie does. So it's interesting how that kind of changes. But yeah, so super excited to see Spider-Man with my son in theaters. That is going to be fantastic. Hope he likes it. Hope I like it. It's interesting, like the last one, No Way Home, I did see it with my wife in theaters. Again, it was a weird time. It was 2021. It was social distance. We were at a VIP theater at here in Toronto. So VIP is like 19 plus. So there's no kids in the audience, which is definitely kind of nice, actually. You had kind of these it was just a more luxurious experience, I'll put it that way. But it was in COVID too, and everyone's kind of trying to stay away with each other. And then right near the end, I think I took my son to finally see it live action, because I can't remember for sure if I did take him. I feel like I did. Or maybe I saw it with a friend, and then eventually my son got to watch it at home. I can't remember what happened. That might have been what happened. But so this is kind of the changing of the guard. So I go from seeing these movies with my wife, and she used to be my partner for these things, or I go with my guy friends, and now Zach is like this inborn partner, which I'm super lucky, because God knows at some point he could decide, I hate comics. I don't want to read comics. Every comic I've given him will just throw it out. I think I would probably have a heart attack. It's interesting because he's taken like my DC Finest to really have become on his shelf. I'm like, whoa, what's happening here? He has a bunch of my compact comics, except for V for Vendetta, Watchmen, and We Three, which are obviously the more like adult ones. All the other ones I own somehow are conveniently on his shelf. I did buy him every Mighty Marvel Masterworks while they were running that version of the program before it was eventually canceled, although we are missing one volume. We're missing Mighty Marvel Masterworks Hulk Volume 1. If anyone has it, please let me know. Really would love to get my hands on that. But otherwise, it's interesting, right? Because as a kid, like I had this small stack of comics, which slowly got bigger and bigger, but it was all stuff that I was buying. There was no one buying me comics. My dad wasn't buying me comics. He wasn't buying me trade paperbacks. Like my son is more used to reading collections and singles. Like he reads Sonic the Hedgehog in singles, but that's like the only thing he's ever really read in singles consistently. And like I have singles for a lot of things, but just in the nature of where I've ended up putting my singles over the years, kind of under a crawl space, they're not as accessible. It wouldn't be his first place to go. And even me, I'm like, part of me doesn't even know why I keep them anymore. It used to be I'm going to keep stuff because it won't be reprinted, but then so much stuff gets reprinted that eventually, do I need to have it at all? There's obviously some stuff where it's like, well, those were my first comics. That was like the first few years of me collecting. They mean more to me, even if I'm not looking at them every day. So, I don't need to tell anyone listening to this, you probably go through these same thoughts. You're someone who reads comics. You get collected editions, or you get singles, or you get a little bit of both. You're not sure what to keep. You're not sure, what is important still as you collect and amass more. Is it something that you're still happy with, or has it become this noose around your neck because there's so much content and it does feel like it's worth nothing? I have a lot of comics from the aughts. I don't think a lot of people want that stuff. So it's one of those things where your collection is worth what someone will pay you, and often it feels like I will be paid zero. So it's kind of a useless collection, which is heartbreaking in a lot of ways, because you spend time cultivating something. But also, I was a consumer, and I do try to remember and think about that and give myself some slack, that I was buying a lot of the stuff just because I loved reading. I loved, being part of the Marvel universe, especially in the aughts, when I was buying most of my singles. It was such this unfolding tapestry, and everything mattered and everything rolled into the next event, and it always felt organic, and it makes sense because you had only a few kind of creators who were really driving the bus for the universe. It hasn't felt like that way in a long time at Marvel. Which in some ways, if you're just kind of picking up your little corner of the world you want to read, that's really great. If you love the kind of universe experience, I would say it has not worked out as well. Where I think it's the opposite effect is that DC, when the New 52 became more compartmentalized, and then over the years has really said, you know what, let's just embrace everything. Everything matters. Everything's connected, and they just have more fun with it. And so you end up at this weird kind of inflection point. I know a lot of people talk about this online about, where is Marvel these days in terms of people's enjoyment compared to DC, and what does that even look like? And there's so many other obviously viable companies. It's not just the big two. I was obviously a big two zombie for many years growing up, although CrossGen was kind of my big coming out party in terms of I'm going to try something else, and it was something brand new, and it's something that I really wanted to, have just for me. It was something that I got to start with at the beginning, and I always am sad that it never continued and never got to do more with CrossGen because there was so much good talent on those books and so much good content. So unfortunately, and Marvel never really did much with those licenses. We have a few omnibuses, which is nice. Did I buy the Mystic one? I think I did. I think I eventually bought it. So I have the Mystic omnibus and the Sigil omnibus. I really want Ruse as an omnibus. That's really the one I want the most, but doesn't look like that's going to happen, but you never know, someday. So anyways, I'm going to stop my rambling on. This is, it's been about half an hour, and hopefully this was not totally boring and maybe a little bit interesting, but thank you for listening to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. Again, this is episode 2151. I believe that is correct. But again, thanks for listening. You can email me at, 1152, I should say. You can email me at the Comic Shenanigans, comicshenanigans@gmail.com. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, listen to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I was listening to an old episode, and I was like, oh yeah, we used to be on Stitcher. That was the thing. I've been around long enough that, other platforms have just kind of gone away, and obviously now we're on Spotify, although I don't think we get a lot of stuff through Spotify or Amazon Music, but we're technically there as well. So a lot of, different podcatchers, but thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. Please do send me some feedback. Would love to hear if this episode was totally boring, if it was interesting, if you have any thoughts on what you'd like to see in future kind of Comic Talk solo episodes where I just kind of ramble on. We do have a bunch of really great interviews in the next few interview episodes, so those will be great, and I can't wait to share those. So thank you once again for listening to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. Have a great day. Bye-bye.